So I specialize in this fat, and I think it's the absolute worst fat, single worst thing, gram for gram, that you can have in your body. So with that kind of an understanding, and I'm a researcher, unless I'm a hypocrite, I better have none in my body.
Dr. Sean O'Mara, I come from a world where insulin resistance is really problematic, but I mean, what would you find to be literally worse than insulin resistance?
Yeah, it's a great question to ask right at the outset. And I'll just say my own experience with insulin resistance is a huge admirer of the process of using it as a biomarker, tracking insulin resistance. When I was a fat, unhealthy, disease-ridden emergency medicine physician that first found out about cutting out carbohydrates, and then I was going paleo, I read literally any article, any study on insulin sensitivity and what you had to do to become more insulin sensitive that I could think about. And it changed my whole life. That one marker and learning, I didn't really track my insulin. I just did what studies showed would reduce insulin resistance and increase insulin sensitivity. And I got dramatically better. All my disease left me. However, since that time, beginning, I found out about a better marker that you can do and need to be doing, and it's instead of tracking insulin resistance and other laboratory values, which I regard as biodynamic, meaning they go up and down for a variety of different reasons throughout the day. I can manipulate these markers through different things. For instance, I could raise insulin by having somebody eat a Krispy Kreme donut. Bad. Or I could increase insulin by having somebody do pull-ups. Good. So right there is a problem.
That's a good
and
point.
People aren't talking about it. So when you start following something that is biodynamic, you're obligated to do a comprehensive forensic analysis of all the potential confounders that you might have in your life that are affecting that. So a better marker, and why I follow this, is these inflammatory markers of structural disease, distinguishing it from a biodynamic metric like a laboratory study, insulin, lipids, glucose, ketones. They all go up for a variety of different reasons in a same time period. But structural disease, 100% free of this problem of confounding. So we can simply measure that disease, change our lives until that disease is gone. And whatever we do to eliminate that disease is good, and whatever is increasing the disease is bad. And it's for the first time in the history of humanity, we now have clarity on what we're supposed to be targeting. It's disease. When you eliminate disease, you restore life. Disease is the lack of ease in people's lives. We need to be tracking disease and not these biomarkers. They do play a role and they're interesting, but if you want your ROI to be the greatest on what you need to follow, and this is what I feel very strongly about, is our country, our species, think of beyond the United States, needs to know what do you have to follow to become healthy. And we need to answer the fundamental question, what is a healthy man and a healthy woman? And these laboratory values are conflicting because they have confounding in them. And we need to give people what it is so we can understand how do you know somebody is healthy or not. And it's structural disease.
I put a link down below for 30% off your entire first order with Thrive Market. Thrive Market focuses on the ingredient quality. That's why getting 30% off your first order with them is awesome. If you go to the grocery store, the reality is you have to spend a lot of time and you need a practical PhD to really read the ingredients, to really understand and cross-reference it. Thrive Market does that already. They do not have garbage ingredients coming into the food that they have on their digital shelves, so to speak. So the reason that I trust Thrive Market is because I know that even if I'm getting something that's like a sweet treat or something that I want to enjoy that's even a snack, at least I don't have to worry about having low quality ingredients. And you can sort by different diet type. I spent a lot of time in Europe recently, and I was just almost in love with the food quality there. And the thing that I like about Thrive is they do a good job of emulating the kind of food quality that's coming into the foods that they have. So that link down below gets you 30% off. It gets delivered right to your doorstep, and you get a free $60 gift with any purchase. So go ahead and check them out. It's in the top line of the description underneath this video.
So structural disease, people hear that and they think, okay, well, I don't have a disease. I just have some insulin resistance. But structural disease is something different. You're talking about, well, it's not something different, but it's something that I think needs to be explained. I mean, you're talking about, let's just come right out and say it so we don't dangle the carrot anymore. I mean, you were talking to me about the structural state of heart fat, literally looking at fat that surrounds the heart. And people have heard of visceral fat. Yes, that's becoming more and more mainstream for people to talk about. But beyond that, even looking at structural disease in the state of heart fat versus an individual biomarker like insulin resistance, which can go up and down by the minute.
Correct. So structural disease is really disease that has a structural form, and we can look at it. And I have been studying visceral fat and heart fat, by the way, for 13 years. But here's the interesting thing. My hairs are standing up. This heart fat thing kind of was like a simmering on the back burner. I was running in our research practice. We just was visceral fat, visceral fat, visceral fat. Heart fat is visceral fat around the heart. It's inflammatory fat of a similar nature to visceral fat, only it's concentrating, growing, strangulating, surrounding the heart. It's constricting it. So on an MRI, these are two different males, and we can see this heart fat in this image in the bottom in white. So on an MRI, organs show up as dark. So the heart is an organ, it's dark, muscles are dark, and fat shows up as white. So surrounding this heart is this large, thick area of fat around the heart. Now, whose skin is that? That's a gentleman in their early 50s who dropped in the parking lot, had a massive sudden heart attack on his way into the gym, not in the gym. He was going into that gym and had a massive heart attack. He came to me 1 month later, and we scanned him, and I showed him why he had that heart attack, because of this big area of fat around his heart. And then let's just, for comparison purposes, compare to this individual here. This guy is 53 at the exact same level, where you can see the septate right there dividing the two sides of the heart. At the exact same level, this individual has no heart fat around him. And this person is 61 years old, and that's yours truly, Sean O'Mara. So I specialize in this fat, and I think it's the absolute worst fat, single worst thing, gram for gram, that you can have in your body. So with that kind of an understanding, and I'm a researcher, unless I'm a hypocrite, I better have none in my body. And so I'm very happy and pleased to show that I don't have any of that fat. But maybe what we should do is take a look at what this fat looks like on physical examination. So here is a diseased heart. This is a heart that's not even as bad as that other one. And by the way, when you see a photograph of a heart outside of a body, that person is no more. So this person had a heart attack and died. But you see this accumulation of thickened yellow adiposity. That's the medical term for fat. That fat is highly inflammatory. And if you know anything about the heart, this is where the left anterior descending artery resides, which has the term, the loathsome term of being called the widowmaker for a reason. It kills men and makes women widows. So this is oftentimes where people have fatal heart attacks on that LAD. And the right coronary artery is up in this area here. And this fat is accumulating in these two particular regions. But you still see areas, large areas, that are devoid of that. So the point is, it doesn't take a lot of this fat to be pathogenic. You can have a heart attack with a fairly small amount of it. So you don't want any of this fat. We'll show you an example of, here's a heart that's beating in an infant, okay? So you come in the world with a heart that's beautiful. I tell my clients, and I tell people when I talk on social media, do you want to know what health is? Look at babies and kids, because they have not yet acquired disease. And then I tell kids, hey, you want to see a diseased man? Look at your parents. That's where disease gradually increases in our lives, and we can see that. So we can take a look at infants when they arrive and get an idea of what health looks like, and that heart is just free. You just see beautiful myocardium. There's trace little bit amount of fat in there, and that's probably fine. But here's what happens. You get way too much of this fat, and it transitions from beneficial fat to inflammatory fat. And the inflammatory fat ends up causing disease within these arteries that are outside the heart. So there's the LAD. Your arteries for your heart reside on the outside. And a lot of people don't know that. I didn't know that till I went to medical school. I always thought that the arteries would be inside the muscle. But they're on the outside, so they're useful for the purposes of surgery. You know, you can do a transplant when these arteries become diseased. You can make a cut there, take a vein out of somebody's leg, saphenous vein, or maybe internal mammary artery, or whatever host site that they want to grab, and already do a transplant when somebody becomes really diseased. But I work with people now to open up these arteries and get rid of the disease by stopping the inflammation that's going on when this heart fat starts accumulating around those hearts. So this is a really big problem.
So does the inflammation that comes out of this fat that surrounds the heart, is it more concentrated epicentering from the fat? So for example, because the fat is actually enveloping the heart, is it a more concentrated burst of IL-6 and everything that's like right in that area?
Yes.
Obviously, it goes into the bloodstream and causes systemic inflammation, but does the location of the fat matter?
Local inflammation. Okay. So in a dose-dependent manner, when you have more of this fat, you'll see more inflammation and more disease. But an interesting point that a lot of people aren't aware of is there's a tendency on the part of cardiologists who will do percutaneous invasive evaluation. They'll do a catheterization procedure, and they put radiopaque contrast material into those arteries and see where there's some disease. And if the disease doesn't reach a threshold of like 60% or higher, typically what I think a cardiologist will start to stent. If it gets above 60%, they start thinking about it. But otherwise, they just tell the person, "Oh, you're fine. You had some disease in there, but you're fine. You didn't need anything." No, you're not fine. Because what causes the heart attack is not so much the disease in there, but platelet aggregation. There's something about that disease that is contributing, or is a marker or a surrogate for the potential for an inflammatory event to be triggered, where these platelets suddenly start clotting, and then you have a heart attack, massive, potentially massive, and you have you suffer ischemia. This clot forms. So the one notion I want to attack is, just because you've been told that you're fine, that you have some disease in there, that you didn't need a stent, doesn't mean you couldn't walk out of there and drop dead of a heart attack in that particular region. So then you might ask, well, why aren't they stenting? Why don't they just maybe open that? Because it won't change that. When you stent it, it's not going to fix that problem. That disease is there, and stents reaccumulate. You get more re-occlusion of atherosclerotic plaques within that area. What we need to do, and even, I don't know right now, a single cardiologist right now in the world who knows this. Not a single one. But for the first time in Thomas DeLauer, we're talking about it. What we need to do is get rid of that heart fat, because that heart fat is causing the inflammation and is causing the triggering of that particular event. The inflammatory substances you correctly asked about through local extension to those arteries create the inflammatory conditions that both cause disease and cause heart attacks. So here's what I'm saying. For the entire world to watch, Sean O'Mara is staking every bit of his credibility, his professional reputation, that if you don't have heart fat, you won't have a heart attack. It's impossible to have a heart attack without this fat here. So what does that mean to the discerning man or woman right now? You want to get rid of that fat, and you want none of it on your heart. You want to begin eliminating it as quickly as possible. Because when I went into AI and looked at every single study, and if you're listening, I said to AI on multiple occasions, can you find a single human being in the history of the world among 8 billion people in all the medical records that you can access, in all the medical studies that you can access, in all of the autopsy records that you can access, which generally are public record, and all the articles that you can look at, and anything you can possibly look at, can you find a single human being that had a heart attack and did not have elevated fat around their heart first? And the answer is always no. You have heart surgeons, literally. Dr. Philovadia spent years cutting through this and never once knew about it and thought about it. But now he's beginning, Philovadia, shout out to him. He's finally he's on board with that it's not cholesterol. He knows it's heart fat. So he's now speaking out against epicardial adipose tissues, and the technical term heart fat. But yet, this is what we got to do. We need a public awareness campaign about this dangerous fat. You are the first podcaster to invite me on to talk about it. So shake your hand for having me on board.
Well, where my mind goes with this is that this is a relatively small amount of fat, right? So how come when we burn fat, when we go through the typical means of losing fat, because I want to cut to the chase of what I know people want, right? Like they okay, like I believe you, I have some heart fat even if I'm healthy on the outside, right? How come we lose fat at an exponential rate in other areas before we lose it there? Because that's like not that much fat. If you had to guess, how many pounds or grams of fat is that, or ounces?
Yeah, it's not much. But to be honest with you, the first fat we see in patients that work with us, and we get them to live a more correctly lifestyle, which is cutting out processed foods, limiting carbohydrates, eating more healthy fats and protein, and then incorporating foods to optimize the microbiome, such as fermented foods, and then reducing stress, which is a big killer, and then exercising in a maximally intensive manner, more aligned with our ancestors. So basic kind of fundamental things. When people start incorporating these fundamental changes into their life, the first fat that we see reduced in the most significant manner is actually this heart fat. Now, if somebody goes through the challenge of getting an MRI, because it costs money, about $300 to $500 typically is on average to get this, and then takes the time to get one, they can track what is changing in their body. But for the most part, to your comment, I don't think people really know what fat they're losing. And we're speaking about the worst disease you can have in your body. And I'll just come out and say it, ladies and gentlemen. This fat you're looking at right here kills more people than cancer. It kills more people than anything else. This is the number one thing most aligned with the deaths of Americans and human beings, because the number one killer of humanity, if you stop and ask that question, what kills more people? It's heart attacks. That's atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, heart attacks and strokes is numero uno. And so this fat is what is the first threat. Visceral fat also causes death. It in and of itself is contributory to atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, but it also causes many other things: cancer, neurodegenerative conditions, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, MS, Lou Gehrig's disease. So basically all form of chronic disease, when we studied it for the National Science Foundation, either improved or went completely away with the elimination of visceral fat. We did not concentrate during that time for the National Science Foundation on heart fat. We were solely concentrating on visceral fat because we were tenacious researchers that kept looking at visceral fat. We didn't want to get off on a side trail looking at something else that might distract us. So we stayed true to our original target and objective to eliminate chronic disease for America, which was what we were trying to do for the National Science Foundation, by finding the most effective biomarker to follow, which was visceral fat. Since that time, especially in the past 2 years, and really the past 6 months, I have completely focused now on the importance of this on this visceral fat around the heart, this heart fat, and because it's such an important objective. And the fact that we have such strong indices in science, there are plenty of studies now looking at this, and more coming out all the time. The best thing we can do for humanity right now is to promote awareness of this and get rid of it.
Have you noticed a direct correlation with the amount of visceral abdominal fat and heart fat? Like, is there, if you have more visceral abdominal fat, do you typically have more heart fat, or does it not always correlate?
This is why I love coming on your show. You just get to the crux of things. So that is such an important question. And let's look at this scan to show you that. Now, this is an MRI scan in a different arrangement. So what we're doing is we're taking a slice of this human being, and this is their front abdomen. This is their back. So these are their back muscles. Their head is up in this direction here where the H is. Their feet are down here where we put this little tiny F, which may not show up on the film here. But this is a slice in this plane right here, kind of front to back. And what we can see is this is subcutaneous fat, and this is subcutaneous fat in the back. And this white stuff in the middle is all the visceral fat inside the abdominal region of this particular person. So here you have a kidney. Here you have a little bit of liver. Here you have some stomach. You have a little bit of colon, small intestine that we're seeing in this, caught in this particular slice. And above their abdomen is their lungs. So this is a basic anatomy. Most humans would understand their lungs are above their abdomen. But right in the middle of your lungs and above your abdomen is this structure right here, your heart. Very, very important organ. And surrounding that heart is this huge chunk of inflammatory fat. So to answer your question, the best way to answer it is let the audience right now see the relationship to elevated visceral fat causes elevated thick fat pad choking their heart. You know what I like to say is people, you walk around, they're short of breath going upstairs. They think they're short of breath because they're fat, they're just deconditioned. No, you're short of breath because that big chunk of fat around your heart is so impacting your physiology and you have no awareness of it. If you got an MRI scan, you saw that big chunk of fat on your heart, you do something about it, you get rid of it, your whole life would change. So this fat absolutely is proportional to this fat right here. This is visceral fat, also known as epicardial fat. The reason it's called epicardial fat is fat in the epicardial space. It literally is up against and attaches itself to the heart and the epicardial region. Visceral fat is within the viscera, the organs. So it surrounds the organs of the abdomen, but this is the type of visceral fat that's surrounding this particular organ here, your heart.
So what do we do?
Well, first thing is what we've already done, I think, in this show, by you inviting me, we begin to promote awareness of this. And then through lifestyle, what we did notice in cadavers, mummified remains of Paleolithic men, which is how you and I are here today talking about it. In 1985, a researcher, was a radiologist, was studying. He was an anthropology major in college, I think at Harvard, and he combined his medical practice of radiology with his love for anthropology, and he started doing MRIs and CTs on Paleolithic remains. And what he noticed was a lack of disease present in people that were during Paleolithic time period, where there was an absence of processed foods. So he proposed on his own the concept of what then was labeled and still is called the paleo diet. So eliminating processed foods and eating in what was believed to be a more Paleolithic manner. So meats, vegetables, fruit, and cutting out processed foods, and generally avoiding sugars and things. And people got dramatically better. And then, what happened was people started cutting out sugars more and more. And what happened next? The keto diet. And we noticed that people, even proved better on a keto diet, lowering their carbohydrates. And then from the keto diet came the carnivore diet, which is basically even lower levels of ketones. And so
lower levels of carbohydrates.
Of blood sugars and higher levels of ketones. Yeah. Thank you for correcting me. That confused a lot of the audience. This fat plays a role in it because we could see the absence of these forms of structural disease, and it's disease, and we call it structural disease because it forms. It's got a structure to it. Unlike insulin resistance or high triglycerides or high HSC reactive protein or some other marker that you might follow in a laboratory, they don't have structure. But because of the structure, we can track it, we can measure it, and we can make it go away. So Paleolithic men didn't have this, and we got it today because of our poor lifestyles.
And I want to double click on that for sure. I want to go into let's reverse engineer what they did. But I just have one quick question, and if we can just handle it quickly and get back into that. If you go and you get a lab test done and you test your high sensitivity CRP or your cardiac CRP and it's still within range, does that mean you don't have heart fat, or is that just like the insulin resistance, that is a single marker that does not tell you entirety? Because I think there's lots of people that will test their CRP. Lots of people, from my experience, and I could be completely wrong, CRP doesn't really elevate until there's a serious problem, or possibly even you're literally in an acute disease state, like you have an infection or something like that when CRP, or it can obviously be high, but it doesn't start to skyrocket to an alarming level unless there's almost something acute going on. But I could be completely wrong.
Yeah. So you can because of confounding, you could have low levels of C-reactive protein, HS, high sensitivity C-reactive protein, in the setting of a person with still this inflammatory fat around them. So inflammatory fat may contribute to elevated HS-CRP, but to my earlier statement, confounding means that there's vulnerability to that marker, even as valuable as HS-CRP is, to suppressing it. So I jumped in. I found some studies where CRP can be acutely lowered for a variety of different things. One, I think, was the exogenous administration of cortisol, prednisone. So you can reduce temporarily, but your body could also induce C-reactive protein through endogenous production of cortisol from sprinting. So sprinting will increase your cortisol, but then it drops it in a lower manner afterwards as a benefit. But depending on those timings, so the confluence of all these other factors can come together, Thomas, and cause somebody to have a lower level of C-reactive protein that might give them false reassurance that because my level at this particular point in time was low, that means I'm good. Meanwhile, hanging out around the heart is this huge chunk of inflammatory fat that continues to grow unbeknownst to them directly causing disease into those coronary arteries where that important interface is happening, where that inflammatory fat is surrounding both the arteries on the outside of the heart and the myocardium.
Yeah, I mean, you're having essentially a direct infiltration of these macrophages that are because of immune system activation around the heart. So, I mean, yes, it could result in like a systemic, higher circulating CRP, but at the same time, like it's going right to the source anyway. It's going right to where we would all fear that a high CRP would lead us to anyway, right? So it's sort of epicentering there, and because of that localization you're talking about, it's like inflammation can also be localized. I think sometimes we look at things as, yes, the body has this whole matrix of everything that works together, and that's certainly the case, but I think we also sometimes discount there's a little bit of independent nature with each organ too, right? Like, I think that you're almost suggesting, hey, this fat surrounds the heart and it can impact the heart, and you may have a perfectly fine liver, right? It's just because of this localization of it, maybe it's harder to trace, harder to look at in the typical level.
It shows up first. That's a very good observation comment. The fat around the heart shows up long before fatty liver disease. Yeah. By the time non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, the newer terms being used to describe basically lipogenesis, fatty deposition within the liver. It's got a variety of different terms to try to draw importance to it now instead of just distinguishing it from alcohol. This fat is downstream to this particular fat here. And so you really want to start looking at the structural disease as soon as it happens, the earliest phase, and not down the road when you now have fatty liver, or obviously when you have a heart attack. So you want to capture this early, and it's really important. So eliminating this fat, first of all, identifying it and eliminating as quickly as possible.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
And I was going to say, and this fat, besides causing disease around the heart, one of the indices, if you want to kind of have an indication whether you may have it, is likely just looking at faces. So I'll show you this gentleman here who came to work with me has a kind of a puffy, kind of a swollen look to his face. And if you understand this look, it's really inflammation within the tissues. So you have a fatty deposition within the face and fatty deposition also in the muscles of the face. And the muscles become inflamed and they just don't work as well. And so you have this, the best way to describe it is this not a very attractive look. Now look at this guy 6 months later as he has started to eliminate his visceral fat. There's less inflammation systemically throughout his body, and it even just a small reduction in his visceral fat, the white in this area to the white here, and also you can see this measurement. It's not very clear. There's a yellow line that I drew from the vertebral body to the anterior aspect of the abdomen. Is significantly smaller, so he's getting a more oval shape. But visceral fat shows up systemically in your face. So a poor man's MRI is just looking at the face. Yeah. You can start looking at these inflammatory changes. And this guy was a Navy Top Gun. When he called me, up on the phone, I have the benefit of being so busy that I get to choose who I want to work with. And this guy sounded like a lot of heavy lifting, Thomas. He sounded really bad on the phone, and I was discouraged about whether I really wanted to work with him, whether he had the ability to follow what guidance and to do the changes in his lifestyle. But when he told me that he was a former Navy Top Gun, I'm like, this guy's got potential. Yeah. Because you've worked in that kind of community. The high performers within the upper echelons of military operations have an unusual degree of motivation. All I had to do was reach back into that motivation, and I got this guy to change. So facial inflammation is key. And let me share with you a really interesting change on these faces, by the way, so you can grasp how much just I showed this own change in my life. But before I show this next one, this was me in my 20s, me in my 40s, and me in 48. So for the sake of the audience, you can see this inflammatory change in this face significantly from 20 to 48. And then as I eliminated visceral fat and found out about it here, you can see my face restructures with less inflammation. And you can see how much I changed. But now let's look at this, what it has never been shown ever on the history of the internet. And I want to show this, and I have permission to show all these images. These are two different males. So these are two different human beings. They're males. And I'd like to invite you to just imagine, if you're watching this show, and I'm speaking now, Thomas, you. Imagine what these faces of these two different individuals look like, how inflamed they are. So you just get an idea in your head. Here's a guy who's older, who's a CEO, has an inflamed-looking face, and he eliminates that visceral fat in 3 months and has that significant change. But it also happens in the elderly. So looking at this individual here, he has an inflamed-looking face, and then 3 months later, he's not only eliminated a lot of inflammation, but look at the changes in his eyes. Yeah. He's gotten more vigorous. He's gotten more expressive. When he first met with us to eliminate his visceral fat, he had a very flat affect and a very flat manner in his speech, and he just was unmotivated. He didn't have much emotion, and he wasn't joking around. He was very serious. Now this guy jokes around, and I use the term inappropriate. It's not because he's inappropriately humorous in a different situation. His humor is inappropriate for his body habitus, how he looks at. He's older. But the truth is, people in their 80s lose their sense of humor and lose their expressiveness. If you think about grandma and grandpa, they're very serious, and you never see them talk around animated like this, like a teenager might, somebody in their 20s, yo, dude. That's because their basal ganglia are functioning so good when they're in their 20s and teenage years, and little kids are goofy. And then older people, it's not because they got more serious. They got more diseased. Yeah. And so this visceral fat causes disease throughout the whole body. And it causes, an inflammatory response that leads to declining of the basal ganglia, the frontal cortex, the hypothalamus, the cortex of the brain in general. So you see a decline in a person's ability to walk and their ability to react to situations simply because of disease. It's not because they're older. And the two things I want to leave the audience with is heart fat is the most important thing you want to eliminate. And then the second thing is to have an awareness is when you get older and you start falling apart, it's not because you're older. It's because you have disease inside your body that you never stopped. And that's a take-home lesson. And so the important thing that I think we have to do as influencers in social media and is to promote awareness of what people should be tracking and following. And we need a reliable marker. And it's this fat around the heart, and it's always related also to the visceral fat within the muscle, within the abdomen, and then also you have present within these individuals muscle fat. So the third type of fat that really relates to these markers are muscle fat. So here are a couple sets of legs with these fatty streaks in it, which is nothing short of marbleization of the human's skeletal muscle in the same way you might marbleize skeletal muscle in a cow, and it's called marbleized steak. Mm-hmm. And then you have improvement in these legs over 2 years. This is an NFL Super Bowl champion who dramatically improved their muscle fat. So muscle fat is proportional to visceral fat and to heart fat.
So if we come back to the paleo stuff you were talking about, I mean, what are the things that Paleolithic era people would do that that's essentially what we do, right? So we think about, all right, probably long periods of time without food, or potentially or varied amounts of time without food. I think that is something that I really look at is, okay, variety in the length of time between meals, not just set, okay, intermittent fasting is great, but that's still on a very structured, the body's smart. The body figures things out. If you just continually fast or you continually intermittent fast without any variance to what you're doing, you better be damn sure the body's going to figure out your eating patterns long before you
100%.
do. And so I'm a fan personally of, okay, what would they do? What would our Paleolithic, what our ancestors do? There might be a time when they get a kill every day. There might be a time when it's 4 days. There might be a time when they get multiple kills per day and they get to feast for 2 or 3 days on protein, not on crap. And then, heaven forbid, winter comes along. Maybe there's a period where they don't get a lot of food for, a week. And the point isn't to say go fast for a week. The point is there should be randomness to when you don't eat. And there should somewhat be randomness to when you do eat. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I get a little frustrated with us trying to gamify everything into this, like, well, I'm going to eat at this time, eat at this time. No, just randomly don't eat and randomly eat. Try it.
Hombre, you sound like me. You sound like my identical twin brother. All my clients who are listening to you right now are saying, that's Dr. Sean. Oh my God, that's exactly what he says. Because it really bothers me that people want a particular schedule. I mean, we just want to know exactly, tell me how long am I supposed to fast? Tell me how long, between meals. Tell me how long I'm supposed to exercise. They want these numbers. Well, sometimes, we were fighting that deer or bison or woolly mammoth a long time. Other times, it was a pretty fast kill. We were able to get it done and we didn't have to. So you need variability to avoid muscle memory when you work out. You need variability to avoid the same kind of stagnation that you get when you eat in a certain pattern and you only stay with that. Yeah, it might appeal to you, your simple cortex, your brain. You want a number or want to stay with it and do the same thing. But variability is key. Variability made our ancestors better, Thomas. Mm-hmm. That's what optimized paleo man during that particular time period. So I think personally, my own belief system about how they exercise is one, they fought and they hunted, and that was really the only way they exercised. I don't think anybody's out there lifting purposely, going to the gym and working out. But I think life's demands were so physiologically demanding. Hunting was life and death business. Yeah. If you didn't eat, you die. You couldn't get that meat, you'd starve. So it was a big imperative. And also, you had to defend yourself against threats and attacks that would happen. So violence is just something that happened, but it's how we exercise. So when it comes to feasting, and I generally advocate, and I see the best resolution of this fat around the heart in what I call feasting and fasting. So I recommend people consider going through fasting periods of time of variable lengths. To your point, sometimes we would hunt and we'd be successful. At times we wouldn't be so successful, and that interval would be longer. But I generally believe that when our ancestors got to hunt, they would fill their bellies and eat as much of that fat before it would rot. They'd get as much as that fat and protein in them as possible. And then when you're filled, which I call feasting, your blood, through a concept physiologically called gastric steal, where your gastrum steals the blood from your periphery to help digest that meat, is unavailable to your muscles, and is preferentially being diverted to your gastrointestinal tract. Our ancestors probably would not have even considered hunting for that first 24 hours or even 48 hours. I think they were consuming huge amounts of meat. And we also see this behavior in modern-day carnivores in the animal kingdom. Lions and tigers in a fed state prey can walk right in front of them. They're just not interested in eating or hunting when they're in that particular fed state. So I recommend clients slowly adopt the practice of feasting to gradually increase the amount of meat and their capacity to eat more food. And I also recommend we could you and I could do a show every day. I'm absolutely convinced of this, how to be healthy. But adding fermented foods when you eat that meat allows you to eat more food. If people are struggling with getting more meat into them when they're eating, adding in concomitantly, chewing together, masticating fermented foods at the same time will allow you to avoid what some people call the meat sweats, and just basically a feeling of not feeling well when you eat a lot of meat. But I completely agree with you, and it bothers me when people say, how long should I be doing intermittent fasting? What is the exact number I'm supposed to be doing? Mix it up. Yep. Nature likes variety.
Yep, totally. And then sometimes go, and the same thing with intermittent caloric restriction. It's just periods of time of constant undulation. We adapted because we adapted. Not if we found one perfect set of rules that we adapted to, then we would fail the moment we diverge from that. Like, we need to be adaptable. And I think we sometimes think that we outsmart this human body, right? Like, I think that, the human body receives signals and the brain is interpreting those signals, not always the other way around, right? So it's like there's things that can happen from our environment that the body and the brain, that the body picks up and then the brain interprets and establishes a pattern based upon what it's interpreting. And that means that the brain is probably pretty darn good at predicting, and almost like an AI model in our own brain, right? It's creating a predictive analysis of what we've always done far beyond our conscious awareness, right? So it's like when you think about how do we take these periods, how do we do the best that we can to keep the body guessing or keep the brain guessing in a way, So
I think it's a super interesting point, and I haven't heard anybody make that point, but I'll just amplify it a little bit. Those signals are critically important that you're speaking about. And do you know the healthier your brain is, the better you're going to interpret those signals?
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
The diseased man or woman is missing the signals. Their body is trying to speak to them. Their environment is trying to speak to them. But when you're not as healthy and perceptive to those signals, those nuances that are available to you, then you miss the full availability of optimizing your health. And that's what I've come to realize. The healthier we get people, the better they get, because they can pay attention to these nuances that come from our environment and come from endogenously within our body.
Yes, our body's like an antenna. It's like, right?
Yeah.
It's like this antenna, and it's like we're not able to receive this signal, and it's not what we're doing consciously. It's also what the brain is doing beyond what we're aware of, receiving the signals, right? We're not telling our body to increase our heart rate when we exercise.
It's pre-programmed.
Right? So the better that you can, and it's like this visceral fat and this epicardial fat, it's like static that is preventing the signal from getting to the brain. That's the way that I think of it. It's like this inflammatory static that is preventing our God-given, ability to sense and everything, and it's impairing that.
Yeah, there's nothing in my experience anecdotally will improve people more and their ability to get better than eliminating visceral fat and heart fat. And if you could only do one scan and get visualization, you want to capture that fat around your heart. And in most cases, believe it or not, when you do these scans of the heart, they're really done in an abdominal scan, because you see right here is actually the liver coming up, and that's included. So in an abdominal scan, you want to catch the entirety of the abdomen, so they have to get the liver, and that means they have to go up high enough to capture that heart. And so, if you just get a abdominal scan MRI, or if you've ever had a CT of your abdomen, you can see your fat around your heart. On a CT scan, fat shows up as dark, muscle shows up as light, so it's just kind of an inversion of that. But anybody listening today, if they've ever had a CT scan or an MRI scan of their abdomen, can go back and read themselves. They can pull the report, and I guarantee the report will not say anything about heart fat or visceral fat. So they'll have to, if you're fortunate enough to be a follower of Thomas, you'll have heard this content and previous shows, and you'll be aware of this, and you can literally and significantly improve the quality of your life the most in any way by going back and looking at what kind of fat you have around your heart, what kind of fat you have within your abdomen, and the kind of fat you have within your muscles.
Well, Sean, where can everyone find you, man?
Yeah, so the best way to find me is from my website. I work with individuals super motivated or interesting conditions. My website is just my name, DrSeanomara.com, DrSeanomara.com. And I also have another website that people can do. That's to work one-on-one with me. I can't work with everybody, but if I don't work with you and I can't work with you, another website that you can still get involved with me in my medical practice is growingbetternotolder.com. Growingbetternotolder.com. And there are some more affordable ways. Instead of working one-on-one, I figured out a way how to do this online virtually with large numbers of people to try to reach more people instead of just doing one-on-one. So that second website is another way to try to get exposure to these important biomarkers and what you got to do to get rid of them.
Right on, Sean. Well, appreciate it, man.
Yeah, absolutely, Thomas. Thank you for having me.